March 17, 1821. The harbour master of Dungarvan, County Waterford, Ireland, discovers 53 drowned cats floating in weighted sacks near the fishing docks. Their bodies are fresh. The killings occurred within the last 12 hours. Each sack bears the same crude marking, a cross scratched into the burlap with fishhooks. The local constabulary initially dismisses this as unfortunate pest control, until they notice something that makes their blood run cold. Every single cat belongs to families in the village. These aren't strays. These are beloved pets, stolen from homes in the dead of night. Within days, the crew of the fishing vessel St. Brendan's Promise, the men responsible for this mass drowning, set sail for the rich fishing grounds off the Porcupine Bank. They're confident. They've performed the old ritual, the one whispered about in taverns when the catches run thin. They've sacrificed the cats to appease the sea. The St. Brendan's Promise never returns. But the truth was far more terrifying than a simple shipwreck. Before we uncover the truth about the Dungarvan fishing village cat massacre of 1821, make sure to subscribe to the Silent Abbey and ring that notification bell. We bring you the darkest, most disturbing chapters of history that time tried to forget. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now, let's descend into one of Ireland's most haunting maritime disasters. Ireland in 1821 exists in a state of profound suffering. The nation writhes under British colonial rule, and the fishing villages of County Waterford represent some of the most economically devastated communities in the British Isles. The Napoleonic Wars have ended 6 years prior, collapsing the military supply contracts that once sustained these coastal settlements. Fish prices have plummeted. Families that have worked the sea for generations now face genuine starvation. Dungarvan, a picturesque harbour town nestled where the River Colligan meets the Atlantic, has seen better centuries. The village boasts a population of roughly 800 souls, with perhaps 200 directly dependent on the fishing industry for survival. The stone cottages that line the waterfront house families whose lineage traces back to the ancient Gaelic kingdoms, the O'Fiolanes, the MacCraiths, the O'Briens. These are people whose ancestors fished these waters when Viking longships still raided the coast. The winter of 1820-1821 has been catastrophically poor for catches. The herring, normally so abundant they turn the sea silver, have inexplicably vanished. The mackerel runs have failed. Even the humble cod, the reliable staple of every fishing family's survival, have become scarce. Parish records from St. Mary's Church document 17 deaths from fever and malnutrition between November 1820 and February 1821. A shocking number for such a small community. Into this desperation walks Padraic Black Paddy Morrissey, first mate of the St. Brendan's Promise and a man with a reputation for knowing the old ways. At 47 years old, Morrissey is illiterate, but possesses an encyclopedic knowledge of maritime folklore passed down through oral tradition. His grandfather, he claims, sailed with privateers in the 1760s, and learned rituals from crews who blended Irish paganism with maritime superstitions from a dozen different cultures. The St. Brendan's Promise itself is a 38-foot fishing smack, built in Cork in 1804. She's seen hard use but remains seaworthy, her hull solid Irish oak, her sails patched but functional. The vessel represents the combined investment of 12 families, a cooperative ownership structure common in impoverished fishing communities where no single family could afford a boat alone. Her captain, Seamus Fitzgerald, is a devout Catholic man of 52, father to 7 children, 3 of whom have already died in infancy. He, a respected figure in Dungarvan, known for his fairness and his sobriety, qualities increasingly rare among fishermen who've turned to Poitin to numb their despair. But something is shifting in Dungarvan as winter turns to spring. The desperation has curdled into something darker. In the taverns, men speak in hushed tones about the failings of faith and the need to remember what worked before the priests came. There's a growing sense that Christianity has failed them, that perhaps the old gods, the ones their great-great-grandfathers worshipped, deserve propitiation. Padraic Morrissey begins to speak more openly about these matters. He tells anyone who'll listen about the ancient practice of offering blood to the sea. Not human blood, of course, they're not savages, but animal blood, specifically cat blood. The cat, Morrissey explains with the confidence of the truly ignorant, is a creature caught between land and sea, able to right itself no matter how it falls, blessed with 9 lives. To drown cats is to send their resilient spirits into the depths, to purchase protection and good fortune with their supernatural essence. The idea spreads like disease through whispered conversations and knowing looks. By early March, a secret plan has taken shape among the crew of the St. Brendan's Promise. The first disappearance occurs on March 11, 1821. Myrnie Fowlane wakes to find her family's orange tabby Roisin missing from the cottage. The cat, a mouser of legendary skill, never wandered far from home. Mayer assumes she's simply hunting and thinks nothing more of it until evening falls and Roisin fails to return. By the next morning, worry has set in. Roisin was more than a pet. She kept the family's meager food stores safe from rats. March 12th brings 3 more disappearances. The O'Brien family loses their grey Tom, Thunder. The MacCraith household finds their tortoiseshell, Biddy, gone from her usual sleeping spot near the hearth. Margaret Walsh's beloved black cat, Midnight, vanishes sometime between the evening milking and dawn. These families know each other, attend the same church, trade fish at the same market. By midday on the 12th, they're comparing notes. The constabulary, such as it is in Dungarvan, consists of a single middle-aged man named Thomas Hennessy, who serves as both town constable and clerk to the local magistrate. Hennessy records the complaints with visible skepticism. Cats wander, he tells the worried families. They hunt, they fight, they sometimes don't come home. He's got more pressing concerns, a series of thefts from the grain merchant, suspected poitin smuggling, the usual petty crimes of a struggling community. But the disappearances accelerate. March 13th, 4 more cats. March 14th, 6. March 15th, 8. By the evening of March 15th, 21 cats have vanished from Dungarvan village, and the pattern is impossible to ignore. Every missing cat comes from a household within a quarter-mile of the harbor. Every disappearance occurs at night. No bodies are found. No sounds of catfights or struggles disturb the night. It's as if the animals are being silently plucked from existence. Fear begins to replace confusion. Ireland in 1821 still exists in a world where supernatural explanations compete with rational ones, where folk beliefs about fairies, banshees, and curses maintain genuine cultural power. Some families whisper about the puka, a shape-shifting spirit known to cause mischief. Others speak of the catsie, fairy cats of Scottish and Irish legend that could steal souls. Constable Hennessy, pressured by increasingly frantic villagers, begins making inquiries. He questions the traveler families camped outside town, an act of casual prejudice typical of the era, but finds nothing. He inspects the woods for signs of wild animals that might be preying on domestic cats. He discovers nothing. On the night of March 15th, young Colm O'Suilleabane, a 14-year-old fisher's son, cannot sleep. His family's cat, Whiskers, has disappeared the previous night, and Colm has taken it upon himself to keep watch for whoever or whatever is taking the village cats. He positions himself in the hayloft of his father's small barn, which offers a view of the narrow street leading to the harbor. Around 2 a.m, Colm sees them. 4 men, moving quietly through the darkness, carrying burlap sacks that writhe and emit muffled sounds. Colm recognizes one man immediately, his father's fishing partner, Liam Brennan. The others are harder to identify in the darkness, but their destination is clear, the docks. Colm debates waking his father, but decides against it. Liam Brennan is a good man, his father's closest friend. There must be a reasonable explanation. Perhaps they're dealing with a rat infestation on the boats. Perhaps they're removing sick or feral cats from the dock area for safety. The boy tells himself these comforting lies and eventually falls asleep in the hay. March 16th dawns gray and cold, with a bitter wind blowing in from the Atlantic. The disappearances have now reached epidemic proportions, 37 cats missing. Entire streets have lost their feline populations. The mood in Dungarvan has shifted from worried to panicked. Crowds gather outside St. Mary's Church demanding that Father Cormac O'Donnell do something, anything. Bless the homes. Excommunicate whoever is responsible. Perform an exorcism. The priest, a man in his 60s who has served his parish for 30 years, tries to calm his flock. He promises to investigate. He urges faith and patience, but patience evaporates on the evening of March 16th, when 13 more cats vanish in a single night, bringing the total to 50. The boldness of the thieves has increased. They're now entering homes through windows left open for the cats' comings and goings, brazenly stealing animals from sleeping households. One family reports hearing sounds in the night but assuming it was their cat, and thinking nothing of it until morning revealed the truth. Constable Hennessy, now genuinely alarmed, organizes a night watch. 20 men volunteer to patrol the streets in groups of 4, armed with cudgels and lanterns. The atmosphere in Dungarvan on the night of March 16th is tense, fearful, angry. Neighbors eye each other with suspicion. Old grudges and petty feuds suddenly seem sinister. But the night watch finds nothing. The 17th of March dawns, St. Patrick's Day, normally an occasion for celebration even in these hard times, and no new cats have disappeared. The watch has worked, people tell themselves with relief. The thieves have been scared off. This relief proves tragically premature. At dawn on March 17th, Harbor Master Diarmuid Cullen arrives at the docks to check on the vessels. The tide is out, exposing the mudflats and rocks of the harbor bottom. That's when Cullen sees them, bodies. Dozens of small, furry bodies, weighted down in burlap sacks, floating in the shallows where the outgoing tide has beached them. The sacks were meant to sink completely, to disappear into the harbor's deep water, but whoever prepared them underestimated the number of rocks needed for the weight. Several sacks have torn open, revealing their contents. Cullen, a hardened sailor who has seen men die at sea, who has pulled drowned children from the water, nonetheless vomits at the sight. Not because of gore, there's little blood, but because of the sheer scale of the killing and the obvious premeditation it required. This wasn't the act of a moment's madness. This was planned, organized, deliberate. He runs to fetch Constable Hennessy, who arrives with Father O'Donnell. Together they pull the sacks from the water. The count is methodical and grim, 53 cats. Some are clearly identifiable by their markings. Others have already begun to decompose slightly from their time in the water. Every single sack bears the same marking, a crude cross scratched into the burlap with what appears to be fishhooks, the Christian symbol perverted into a marker for pagan sacrifice. The irony isn't lost on Father O'Donnell, whose hands shake as he makes the sign of the cross over the dead animals. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button to help us share these forgotten histories. The truth of what happened next shocked the entire county and reveals something deeply disturbing about how quickly civilization can crack under pressure. Share this with someone who loves dark mysteries. Now let's discover what happens next. Word spreads through Dungarvan with the speed of wildfire. By mid-morning on March 17th, nearly the entire village has gathered at the harbor. The grief is immediate and visceral. These aren't just dead animals, they're family members, children's companions, irreplaceable workers in the constant battle against vermin that threatens every household's food stores. Meyer Nifalan identifies Roisin by her distinctive white chest patch. She collapses to her knees, weeping. Her daughter, 8-year-old Sile, has been asking for Roisin every day. How does a mother explain this cruelty to a child? The O'Brien family finds Thunder, the gray Tom who slept each night with their youngest son. Margaret Walsh discovers Midnight, the black cat who had been her companion since her husband drowned 4 years prior. One by one, families claim they're dead, and with each identification the collective fury of the village grows hotter. Constable Hennessy knows he needs to act quickly before this mob turns violent. He begins a formal investigation, starting with the most obvious question: who had access to the docks at night? The answer leads him immediately to the fishing crews. The night watchmen from March 16th are re-interviewed. Did they see anything unusual near the docks? Any of the fishing vessels showing signs of activity? One watchman, Kieran Doyle, admits he saw lights on the St. Brendan's Promise around midnight but assumed Captain Fitzgerald was preparing for an early departure. This statement sends Hennessy directly to Fitzgerald's cottage. The captain is home, and the constable notices immediately that Fitzgerald looks haggard, sleepless, deeply troubled. When questioned about his whereabouts the previous night, Fitzgerald hesitates, then claims he was home with his family. His wife Eileen confirms this. But there's something in her eyes, a barely perceptible flicker, that tells Hennessy she's lying. Wives in this era rarely contradict their husbands to authorities, but the body language speaks volumes. Hennessy presses harder. Were any crew members on the Promise last night? Fitzgerald's resistance crumbles. Yes, he admits. The crew was aboard. They were preparing. Preparing for what? The question hangs in the air. Fitzgerald breaks. The entire story tumbles out in a rush of words and tears. The plan had been Padraig Morrissey's idea, the first mate who now sits silent in the corner of Fitzgerald's cottage. The ritual, the ancient practice of blood sacrifice to ensure a successful voyage. The crew had argued about it for weeks. Some refused outright. Others, desperate and hungry, their children crying from empty bellies, eventually agreed. They stole the cats over the course of 5 nights, keeping them confined in the Promise's hold, feeding them scraps to keep them quiet. On the night of March 16th, with the watch distracted by their patrols of the streets, the crew gathered on the boat, 12 men in total. Fitzgerald describes the scene with the hollow voice of a man confessing his soul's damnation. They drowned the cats in buckets, holding them under until they stopped struggling. Some men wept as they did it, others remained stone-faced. Morrissey performed what he claimed was the proper ritual, muttering words in garbled Irish and Latin that probably meant nothing, marking each sack with the cross in some twisted notion of blessing the sacrifice. The plan was to weight sacks properly and deposit them in the deepest part of the harbor channel, where they would never be found. But in the darkness, working quickly, several sacks received insufficient weight. The tide's movements did the rest, beaching the evidence. Father O'Donnell, who has accompanied Hennessy to Fitzgerald's cottage, listens to this confession in horror. "You've committed blasphemy and murder," he tells the captain, his voice shaking. "What you've done, this mockery of Christian symbolism in service of pagan superstition, it's an abomination." Fitzgerald, normally a devout man, can only nod. He knows. God help him, he knows. But Hennessy needs names, all of them. Who else participated? Fitzgerald provides the list. Padraic Morrissey, Liam Brennan, Todd H.G. Murphy, Sean O'Donnell, Cormac Lynch, Ewan McCarthy, Fiatra Quinn, Donal Ryan, Brian Kelleher, Michael Cronin, Fergal O'Sullivan, and Fitzgerald himself. 12 men, 12 families, all of them crew members on the St. Brendan's Promise. The constable immediately sets out to arrest the men. By nightfall on March 17th, all 12 are in custody, held in the cramped stone building that serves as Dungarvan's jail, essentially a converted storehouse with barred windows. The village is in uproar. Families of the arrested men defend their actions. These are good men driven to desperation, they argue. Others demand harsh punishment for the cruelty inflicted on innocent animals and the violation of their homes. Property rights mean something even in poverty. The cats were stolen property, valuable working animals. The physical evidence is catalogued with grim precision. 53 dead cats, 37 sacks, some held multiple cats. The wooden buckets used for drowning, still damp, still reeking of wet fur and fear. The fishhooks used to scratch the crosses. Rope, stones for weights. All of it carefully documented by Hennessy and witnessed by Father O'Donnell and Harbour Master Cullen. But even as the investigation proceeds, another element enters the story. The St. Brendan's Promise, provisioned and ready to sail, sits at the dock. The crew is in jail, but the boat represents the livelihood of 12 families. Families who still need to eat, regardless of what their men have done. On March 19th, a delegation of wives approaches Magistrate Edmund Blackwood, the local Protestant landowner who serves as the district's legal authority. They beg for leniency. Their husbands, they plead, were driven mad by hunger and superstition. Jail them, fine them, flog them if you must. But please allow them to sail. The boat is already provisioned. The investment has been made. If they can make one good catch, the families might survive until summer. Blackwood, a man whose journals survive in the Waterford County Archives, agonizes over this decision. The law is clear. Theft of property, animal cruelty, such laws existed even then, though rarely enforced. But he also understands the economic reality. If these men don't fish, their families starve. If their families starve, they become a burden on the parish, which means ultimately a burden on him. After 3 days of deliberation, Blackwood reaches his decision. The men will be tried, but they will be released on their own recognizance until the Assizes Court session in June. This allows them to sail, to attempt to salvage something from this disaster. The decision is announced on March 22nd. The reaction in Dungarvan is mixed. Relief from the families of the accused, rage from the families whose cats were killed. Father O'Donnell publicly denounces the decision from his pulpit, calling it a mockery of justice. The crew of the St. Brendan's Promise wastes no time. On March 24, 1821, they set sail for the Porcupine Bank fishing grounds, approximately 120 nautical miles southwest of the Irish coast. It's a rich fishing area but dangerous, known for sudden storms and treacherous currents. Captain Fitzgerald's last word. Before departure, witnessed by a dozen people on the dock, are recorded by Harbour Master Cullen in his log. "We go with God's mercy and the sea's blessing. May we return with holds full and debts paid." The St. Brendan's Promise sails into the morning mist and disappears from view. For the first 2 weeks after the Promise's departure, Dungarvan exists in a state of tense waiting. The boat was provisioned for a month-long voyage, so no one expects its return before late April at the earliest. Life continues with a brittle normalcy. The families of the crew wait. The families of the murdered cats nurse their grief and anger. the village divides along fault lines of sympathy and condemnation. Then on April 8th, a currach, a traditional Irish fishing boat, returns to Dungarvan with disturbing news. The crew encountered debris floating approximately 40 miles southwest of the coast, smashed timbers, torn sailcloth, items that appeared to be from a fishing vessel. They collected what they could, but most had already sunk or drifted beyond reach. The debris is examined by Harbour Master Cullen, who identifies several pieces as likely, though not certainly, from the St. Brendan's Promise. A section of rail with a distinctive repair patch, a piece of the mast with particular notches, but nothing definitive. The sea destroys and disguises, making absolute identification impossible. More waiting follows. Weeks pass. Other fishing vessels return from the Porcupine Bank grounds, but none report seeing the Promise. No one has heard distress signals. No wreckage has been found beyond that first debris field. The boat has simply vanished. By early May, hope begins to fade. The provisions would be running low. Even the most optimistic voyage duration has passed. Magistrate Blackwood, in consultation with harbor authorities, begins the process of declaring the vessel lost at sea. The legal implications are complex and heartbreaking. If the crew is dead, who stands trial for the cat killings? The crime was committed, evidence collected, confessions obtained. But British law requires the accused to be present for trial. The families of the victims demand justice, but justice for a crime committed by dead men becomes philosophically complicated. Father O'Donnell takes a hard line in his sermons throughout May. The loss of the Promise, he declares from the pulpit, is divine retribution. God has judged these men and found them wanting. Their sacrilegious ritual, their perversion of Christian symbols in service of pagan superstition, their cruelty to innocent creatures, all of it has earned them watery graves. These sermons deeply divide the parish. The widows and orphans of the Promise's crew sit in the pews, listening to their priest condemn their husbands and fathers as justly punished sinners. Some walk out, others weep. A few, caught between faith and grief, accept the father's judgment, adding guilt to their mourning. But the matter doesn't end there. In late May, something extraordinary occurs. A fishing boat from Dingle, on the far western coast of Ireland, arrives in Dungarvan with a survivor. Fiachra Quinn, the Promise's youngest crew member at just 19 years old, is carried off the boat more dead than alive. He's suffering from severe dehydration, exposure, and what we would now recognize as profound psychological trauma. Dr. Andrew Morris, Dungarvan's only physician, tends to Quinn for 3 days before the young man is stable enough to speak coherently. His story, recorded in sworn testimony by Constable Hennessy and witnessed by Magistrate Blackwood, provides the horrifying truth of the Promise's fate. According to Quinn's account, the voyage began normally enough. The weather was fair. The boat made good time reaching the fishing grounds. On March 28th, 4 days into the voyage, they began setting nets. The first day's catch was mediocre but acceptable. The crew's mood was cautiously optimistic. But on March 29th, everything changed. Quinn describes the crew waking to find dozens of cats on the boat. Not real cats. These were translucent, ghostly apparitions that moved through the rigging and across the deck without sound. Padraic Morrissey, the first mate who had organized the ritual, was the first to see them. He screamed, pointing, but only half the crew could see the spectral animals. Quinn could see them. He describes them in detail that still carries the terror of the experience. Their eyes glowing green, their mouths open in silent cries, their bodies half substantial, flickering in and out of visibility. They didn't attack or threaten. They simply watched. Everywhere the crew turned, ghostly cats observed them. The crew's response split along lines of belief. Morrissey, convinced the ritual had backfired, became increasingly erratic. Captain Fitzgerald, ever the pragmatist, attempted to maintain order and dismissed the apparitions as exhaustion-induced hallucinations. Others fell somewhere between these extremes, uncertain what they were seeing but deeply unsettled. On March 30th, the weather turned. A storm arose from the southwest with shocking speed, the kind of sudden Atlantic tempest that has destroyed countless vessels throughout maritime history. The Promise was a sturdy boat with an experienced crew, but the storm's ferocity overwhelmed them. Quinn describes waves towering above the mast, wind that shredded the sails, rain so heavy that distinguishing sea from sky became impossible. The crew fought for 12 hours straight, bailing water, securing loose equipment, manning the tiller and rotating shifts. But Quinn also describes something else, something that separates this from a simple weather disaster. Throughout the storm, he claims, the ghostly cats remained visible to those who could see them, and they were increasing in number. Where dozens had been before, now hundreds prowled the rigging, sat on the rails, watched from every surface. Morrissey, by now completely unhinged, began screaming about a curse. He confessed everything to the crew who hadn't been directly involved in the drownings, 2 younger members who had been excluded from the ritual itself. He begged the sea for forgiveness, offering himself as sacrifice. What happened next remains disputed and unclear, filtered through Quinn's traumatized memory and potential fabrication. He claims Morrissey, in a fit of religious mania, threw himself overboard during the height of the storm, believing his death would appease whatever forces they'd offended. Whether this is true or whether Morrissey was simply washed overboard by a wave, the result was the same. The first mate was gone. The storm continued through the night of March 30th and into March 31st. The Promise was taking on water faster than the crew could bail. Captain Fitzgerald made the decision to abandon ship and take to the lifeboat, a small dinghy designed to hold perhaps 6 men in calm seas. 12 men tried to board a boat meant for 6. In the chaos and darkness, the lifeboat capsized within minutes of launching. Quinn, a strong swimmer despite his youth, managed to grab onto a section of broken timber. He watched the Promise founder and sink, watched his crewmates disappear into the waves one by one, watched Captain Fitzgerald go under, still calling out prayers to the Virgin Mary. Quinn floated alone for what he estimates was 3 days, though his sense of time had become unreliable. He experienced severe hallucinations from dehydration, or at least he believes they were hallucinations. He describes a massive spectral cat, the size of a whale, swimming beneath him, its green eyes visible in the dark water. He describes the voices of drowned cats singing to him, promising rest if he would only let go and sink. He was finally spotted by the Dingle fishing boat on April 3rd, unconscious and clinging to his timber raft through muscle memory alone. The crew initially thought he was a corpse until they detected a feign. T-pulse. Quinn's testimony creates a sensation. Some dismiss his talk of ghostly cats as the ravings of a traumatized, dehydrated mind. Others, particularly in a culture still deeply saturated with folk belief, accept his account as literally true. The curse was real, they argue. The cats demanded vengeance, and the sea delivered it. Father O'Donnell uses Quinn's testimony to reinforce his previous sermons. Here is proof, he declares, of divine justice. The men who drowned innocent creatures met their own drowning. The symmetry is too perfect to be coincidence. But there's a legal problem. Quinn is the sole survivor of a crew that committed admitted crimes. Under British law, is he liable for those crimes even though he played no direct role in the cat drownings? Magistrate Blackwood wrestles with this question throughout June. The families of the drowned cats demand Quinn stand trial. He was part of the crew, they argue. He benefited from the planned voyage. He must have known what was happening. The fact that he claims he didn't participate directly in the drownings is irrelevant. He's an accessory. Quinn's family, his widowed mother and 3 younger siblings, beg for mercy. He's just a boy, they plead. He survived horrors no one should face. He's lost 11 friends and colleagues. Hasn't he suffered enough? The case becomes a test of how Dungarvan will process its collective trauma. On July 12, 1821, the Assizes Court convenes in Waterford City, with Judge William Hale presiding. Quinn is charged as an accessory to theft and animal cruelty. The trial lasts 3 days. Evidence is presented: the dead cats, the sacks, the confessions of the now dead crew members. Quinn testifies in his own defense, describing his exclusion from the ritual planning, his horror upon discovering what his crewmates had done, his lack of power as the youngest crew member to stop it. The prosecution is led by a local barrister named Richard Coman, who argues that Quinn's passive acceptance of the crime makes him complicit. The defense, provided pro bono by solicitor James Connolly, argues that Quinn was a subordinate crew member with no authority to prevent the killings and no legal duty to report them before the voyage. The jury, composed of 12 Protestant landowners and merchants, the only class eligible for jury service under the laws of the era, deliberates for 7 hours. Their verdict: guilty of accessory to theft, not guilty of animal cruelty. The distinction is important. Theft is a property crime, punishable but not severely so for a first offense. Animal cruelty, particularly the mass killing of 53 animals, could carry harsher penalties. Judge Hale sentences Quinn to 6 months in Waterford City Jail and a fine of £10, a sum that represents nearly a year's wages for a fisherman. The sentence is considered relatively lenient, reflecting perhaps some sympathy for Quinn's youth and survival ordeal, or perhaps simply the legal confusion about how to punish accessory liability when the principal offenders are dead. Quinn serves his sentence and is released in January 1822. He never returns to Dungarvan. Records show he emigrated to America in 1823, settling in Boston's Irish community. He never goes to sea again, working instead as a dock laborer and later as a tavern keeper. He dies in 1869 at age 67, and his obituary in the Boston Pilot newspaper makes no mention of the St. Brendan's Promise or the events of 1821. Meanwhile, Dungarvan struggles to move forward. The economic impact of losing 12 breadwinners in a community of 800 is devastating. The parish poor rolls swell with widows and orphans. The cooperative ownership structure of the Promise means multiple families have lost their invested capital. But something else changes in Dungarvan. Something harder to quantify but equally significant. The superstitious practices that had been creeping back into the community during the desperate winter month are violently rejected. Father O'Donnell's strong stance against paganism finds a receptive audience. The old ways, the whispered rituals, the folk practices, all of it becomes associated with the disaster. The church records show a dramatic increase in Easter confessions in 1822, with many parishioners confessing to harboring superstitious beliefs or engaging in non-Christian practices. There's a cultural purge happening, a community trying to cleanse itself of what it now sees as dangerous heterodoxy. The Dungarvan Cat Massacre of 1821, as it comes to be known in regional folklore, resonates far beyond one small Irish fishing village. The incident becomes a cautionary tale told throughout maritime communities in Ireland and beyond, a story about the dangers of abandoning Christian faith for superstition, about the consequences of cruelty, about divine retribution. But the story's influence extends into unexpected areas. In 1823, a Dublin newspaper, the Freeman's Journal, publishes a lengthy account of the incident. The story is picked up by British papers, then spreads throughout the English-speaking world. It arrives in America, where it's reprinted in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia newspapers serving Irish immigrant communities. The story becomes moral ammunition for various cultural conflicts. Protestant papers use it to criticize Catholic superstition and Irish backwardness. Catholic papers use it to criticize the economic desperation of British colonial rule that drove good men to such extremes. Animal welfare advocates use it to argue for stronger animal cruelty laws. Rationalists use it to mock belief in curses and supernatural retribution. In Ireland itself, the incident contributes to a broader cultural shift already underway. The Catholic Church, increasingly organized and powerful in the early 19th century, is working to standardize religious practice and eliminate folk beliefs it considers pagan or heretical. The Dungarvan disaster becomes a teaching example in seminaries. Here's what happens when the faith becomes corrupted by superstition. Legal scholars note the case as an interesting example of accessory liability and the challenges of prosecuting crimes when principal offenders are deceased. Quinn's trial is cited in several Irish law journals in the 1820s and 1830s. Maritime historians find the incident valuable for understanding the superstitious beliefs that persisted among sailing communities well into the industrial age. Despite advances in navigation, shipbuilding, and weather prediction, sailors remained among the most superstitious populations in society. The Dungarvan case illustrates why. The sea remained fundamentally unpredictable and deadly, creating a psychological need for some sense of control through ritual. But perhaps the most significant impact occurs in animal welfare law. Britain in 1821 is on the cusp of the modern animal welfare movement. Richard Martin, an Irish MP, is drafting what will become the Cruel Treatment of Cattle Act of 1822, Britain's first animal cruelty legislation. The Dungarvan incident, with its mass killing of domestic animals, provides Martin with a powerful example of the cruelty his law seeks to prevent. When the act passes in 1822, it applies only to cattle and livestock, not to cats. But it establishes the legal principle that animals deserve protection from wanton cruelty. Later expansions of the law will reference the Dungarvan case as an example of the kind of abuse that necessitates legal intervention. The incident also influences literature. Irish writer William Carleton, whose Traits and Stories of the Irish Peasantry published throughout the 1820s-1840s documents rural Irish life and folklore, includes a thinly fictionalized version of the Dungarvan story in his 1833 collection. His rendering emphasizes the supernatural elements, presenting the ghostly cats as real manifestations of divine justice. In Dungarvan itself, the legacy is complex and long-lasting. For generations, the story is told and retold, with each telling emphasizing different aspects depending on the teller's purpose. Parents tell it to children as a lesson about respecting animals. Priests tell it as a warning against superstition. Old sailors tell it as a cautionary tale about the sea's unpredictability. The harbor where the cats were drowned develops a reputation for being haunted. Fishermen in later decades report seeing spectral cats near the docks on moonless nights. Whether these sightings represent genuine belief, elaborated folklore, or simple imagination is impossible to determine, but they persist in local oral tradition well into the 20th century. One particularly poignant consequence emerges in the decades following the disaster. Dungarvan develops an unusual custom. Every year on March 17th, the date the drowned cats were discovered, families leave bowls of cream at their doorsteps for stray cats. The practice, which has no precedent in Irish tradition, appears to originate as an act of communal atonement, a way of honoring the murdered animals and perhaps seeking to appease whatever spiritual forces the villagers believe were offended by the massacre. This custom is documented by several visiting scholars and travelers throughout the 19th century, who note it as a peculiar local tradition. The practice continues, remarkably, into the early 20th century, only fading as Dungarvan modernizes and urbanizes. The broader question the Dungarvan incident raises remains relevant. What drives ordinary people to commit acts they would normally consider unthinkable? The crew of the St. Brendan's Promise weren't monsters. They were fathers, husbands, churchgoers, people with normal moral compasses. Yet they planned and executed the mass drowning of beloved pets, violating both legal and social norms. The answer lies in the intersection of desperation, cultural belief, and group psychology. Severe economic stress erodes moral boundaries, making people susceptible to solutions they would reject in better times. When someone like Padraig Morrissey offers a ritual that promises relief, it gains traction not because people are gullible, but because they're desperate. The group dynamics amplify this effect. Once several crew members agree to the plan, social pressure builds on holdouts. No one wants to be the one who dooms the voyage by refusing to participate in the necessary ritual. The crew convinces itself collectively, each member drawing courage from the other's participation, creating a feedback loop of escalating commitment. This psychology, desperation plus group reinforcement leading to moral transgression, appears throughout history in contexts far removed from 19th century Irish fishing villages. Economic crises, food shortages, and social stress create conditions where normal ethical boundaries become negotiable, where the unthinkable becomes possible. The supernatural elements of the story, Quinn's testimony about ghostly cats, the apparent divine retribution of the shipwreck, the haunting of the harbor, these remain matters of interpretation. Skeptics see psychological trauma, guilt-induced hallucination, and coincidence. Believers see evidence of a moral universe that punishes cruelty. What's undeniable is that the crew who performed the ritual met deaths that eerily mirrored the deaths they inflicted. The symmetry is striking enough that it's been remarked upon by every account of the incident for 2 centuries. Whether this represents divine justice, karmic balance, or simple tragic irony depends entirely on one's worldview. What do you think drove 12 seemingly normal men to commit such an act of calculated cruelty? Was the loss of the St. Brendan's Promise divine retribution, as Father O'Donnell preached, or simply the tragic coincidence of a storm-prone season? And what about Fiachra Quinn's testimony? Was he describing real supernatural phenomena, or were the ghostly cats projections of his guilt-racked, traumatized mind? Leave your theories in the comments below. We love hearing different perspectives from our community. The Dungarvan cat massacre remains one of Ireland's most disturbing maritime disasters, a story where superstition, desperation, and cruelty converged with tragic consequences. It reminds us that even good people, under enough pressure, can convince themselves to do terrible things. If you found this story as haunting as we did, subscribe to The Silent Abbey for more forgotten chapters of history. Ring that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the darkest corners of the past. Share this video with anyone who appreciates history's stranger and more unsettling moments. The sea keeps its secrets, but sometimes those secrets wash ashore. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another lost chapter of history that time tried to forget.